It talks to the distinctions, right? So even as a coach, back to like the practicality of this, how are you listening for how people want to be held accountable? For
Yeah.
some of us, me, I'm very visual. I thrive when I have a visual reminder. I'm looking out of my camera because what's beside me? It's okay, what's the vision for this quarter for the business?
Yeah.
Is this
Yeah.
aligned? Am I just saying, oh, I'll do that when it's not really aligned with where I'm going or where we are going as a team or an
Yeah.
organization? That's not being responsible. Back to responsibility. What are you
Mm.
responsible for as an individual, as a team, as a business? That's got to come part and parcel with this conversation around accountability as well.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Britton, and welcome to the Coaching Money podcast. I've been on a mission for the last 20 years to expand the coaching conversation to many. Along with my co-host, Evana Valle, we're going to be exploring coaching as it relates to conversations, connection, and change in both personal and professional settings. Coaching Money is about creating empowering and thought-provoking spaces for conversation which strengthen relationships and enhance results. Throughout the Coaching Money podcast, we'll share tools, practices, and approaches to support you in your conversations, one dialogue at a time.
All right, welcome back. So, Ivana, I'm really excited. I was surprised to hear as an experienced podcaster, most podcasts never go beyond 7 episodes. So here we are.
Really?
Welcome. My name is Jennifer Britton, and I'm the CEO and founder of Potentials Realized. I've had the pleasure of working in this space, pioneering in this space of really scaling the coaching conversation to many. Because where does change happen? It happens not just one drop at a time. It's when we create massive change through the ripple effect. So, Ivana, what comes forth for you this morning?
Yeah. Wow. Thanks. It's been such a fun, joyful process connecting with you and hopefully bringing value and supporting our listeners in this conversation. So whatever these topics are, whatever's relevant for you, you can go listen to that episode and the relevance it has for you. So that's really what I'm getting clear on. And I think that's been partially by intention and design, but also it's evolved that way. And I think part what you said already is when you're thinking about podcasts and when you're thinking about the Coaching Money conversation, it really is about that evolution and allowing yourself to evolve or dance in the conversation to see what wants to evolve. So as my AirPod drops out.
And
Yeah.
well, as you're putting that back in, what comes to mind, because we also sort of, a big part of what we do at Potentials Realized and Group Coaching Essentials is really having this dual dance of the two layers of we're modeling something, but then there's also a learning piece behind it. And I think one of the big pieces of our work that we know in the best practices of group and team coaching or coaching many is the need for modular design. So there needs to be a sequencing, yet at the same time, conversations can stand alone. And so to your point, right, I think people can probably enjoy today's episode, which is all about accountability on its own, or you may want to check out the first episodes. We've been keeping these to about 30, 40 minutes. So we hope that you'll head on over to coachingmanypodcast.com and actually join us. There are going to be a lot more social feeds as we step into fall 2024. So stay tuned, especially if you want to follow along, because we really hope that this is a practical space to help you with the tools, the practices, and the approaches for doing better work, doing your greatest work as a group and team coach or a coach of many.
Yeah. And I want to add, Jen, if I may, if this is your first episode, you're like, what does accountability have to do with the bigger conversation of coaching many? I invite you to actually go back to episode 2, which is where we set the framework around the 4 coaching focus areas. And accountability is one of those. So it is a central piece element that you want to have some intentionality, some focus when you're creating your conversations, whether it be in the boardroom as leaders or teams in a team coaching conversation or a group conversation or even around your table, right? The accountability conversation is one element or one aspect of the focus of around coaching and coaching many. So I want to just put some context to that. For people who haven't been following us from episode 1, this is where it fits. So go back to episode 2 if you want to get a broader sense of how accountability fits in this coaching many conversation.
Love it. And I love that we're focusing on context. So I'm going to take us from context very quickly, just to where are we going today? Because for some of you as listeners, you might be like, accountability. Oh my goodness, lots of things come to mind. So we're going to talk about what does accountability look like? How do we engage, co-create it with our group clients and our team clients? Because it is a little bit different. Then we're going to look at like the whole notion of activating peer accountability. Because really, coaching in the many space is truly about the people we work with and setting them up for success. So how do we activate that peer layer? And then we're going to get into accountability for ourselves. How do we grow and continue to grow as coaches? And I'll be sharing some of the exciting app work that I've been working on this summer. And then we're going to get to application, really getting you to think about what can you do to ramp up or boost your accountability in the teams that you're working with or the groups that you're working with. And of course, by default, we also need a one-on-one environment as well, because so many of you, especially as a group coach, may be having group conversations and then individual one-on-ones with your group clients, right? There's not usually an ethical sort of layer there that we have to say we can't have a hybrid of some one-on-one time with groups. So Evana, anything else you want to stress for like process? Because you said it a few minutes ago before we started this recording, that truly accountability and the work of the group coach is all about process and design. So we're putting a little bit of a laser focus today on what's the context and what's the frame of where we're going.
Beautiful. Yeah. So as I was saying, and I'm going to just toot your horn, if I may, is this really became super valuable and super clear to me when I went through the program, the group coaching essentials myself, because as a one-on-one coach, you innately do accountability, right? And I'm going to speak of my own shift. And for maybe some of the newer coaches who might be listening and really being a sponge for this work is the fact is it's not a one size fits all. So accountability, whether it be individual or group, I'll let you speak more to team because it's not my area of expertise, but it really isn't. So part of what we have to get a handle on as a coaching many group team coach or even one-on-one coach, it's not for us to tell others what the accountability is. Our role is really to actually support the container, whether it be individual, group, or team, to allow what the client or the participant wants for accountability and to support them to connect that to their goals, connect that to what it is. So they're taking that action, or sometimes they're slowing down so they can actually see what is it that I actually want and how does it fit? So I can ask my coach or my peer, which we'll get into in a few minutes, for support so I can fulfill that, so I can cross the finish line. So to me, that's an essential element when it comes to accountability, is that presencing of it is not for us to tell someone what their accountability or what it has to look like. It's for us to support them in that discovery of what does accountability look like. And a lot of people, that's new, whether it be participants, even as a coach for myself, like keeping myself accountable, let alone developing the muscle and the skill to support my participants to describe, to articulate what they needed to be successful. And for me to hold their feet to the fire. That's our role.
Yeah.
Why? For their greatest success, not for our own agenda.
You've got me grabbing my phone today because I'm like, what is really the definition of accountability? Because you've just raised sort of like a critical point. Accountability looks different across our group members. Some people, that is what gives them traction and gives them the fire. For others, it's like, I'm not sure. But then it speaks to as well, like the muscles of self-control, right? Self-determination. And I think that's a really important piece in today's world. Certainly it's for different age groups as well. It makes me think of how do we help people in younger generations as well build some of the muscles that maybe aren't quite as inherent because of the educational process. And I don't always like to put my family on the spot, but I'm thinking of a recent situation this morning of even getting my son ready and out the door for work. And, I was busy doing some outdoor work in the midst of it. And he's like, can't you make me breakfast? And I'm like, no, I can't. Sort of busy. But, I think I over time for accountability, I've learned as a professional, especially through my 20s, that like if I was going to be successful, it wasn't about waiting on anyone else. I had to develop that self mastery of here's the goal. What are the steps that are going to help me move from there here to there? And how do I take consistent action to create the momentum that
Yeah.
builds it? Because that's
But
accountability.
you've touched on something really important. And I'm hearing it with my coaching hat, but also as an individual woman hat, is it is that self-mastery. And our role as a coach is to empower our
Empower.
participants and our clients to say,
Yeah.
I want this. I need this. There's
Yes.
no difference in terms of even a lot of the women that I work with, they're very fragile coming out of a relationship transition. They're reevaluating who they are. They're reevaluating what their role is, their identity, and they actually don't even know what they want and what they
Yes.
need.
Yes.
Because for so many years, for whatever reason, they put their needs secondary, whether it be for their children, their
Yes.
spouse, their family, all this stuff. And so this is a muscle of empowerment. Like
Yes.
to me, this is really the essence of accountability, is allowing, supporting that self-mastery that you mastered or developed in your 20s and are carrying through, but you're also very intentional with how you navigate that now in your reality, in your situation. And that's, I think, important for all of us, whether it be for ourselves or even in our coaching hats or coaching conversations.
And how do we supportively activate it in others? Because to my son's generation, right? I think for many reasons, pandemic and other reasons, they've been supported at a very different level. But what we have seen over the generations is what happens then when these people go to work. Like it's a different world. And so here's to accept responsibility. I'm going to the Merriam-Webster dictionary. An obligation or willingness to accept responsibility or to account for one's actions, right? So that is, it's about self-mastery and self-responsibility. So it all comes down to, and again, I've just found something here that's interesting. The word choice and actions comes out mindtools.com. And this is a resource we often talk about in Group Coaching Essentials. Here's what they say. This is from mindtools.com. Quote, when you're personally accountable, you take ownership for what happens as a result of your choices and actions. You don't blame others or make excuses, and you do what you can to make amends when things go wrong. To become more accountable, make sure that you're clear about rules and responsibilities.
And that's a big part of team. Even in team coaching, what you just said there, Jen, I was like, ding, 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 team coaching.
Team coaching. You got it.
Yeah. And go ahead.
Yeah. I'm going to let you go because we're both thinking on different tangents. I know.
I think so. I think a layer that I want to throw in, because this is something that I've faced in recent months, and I think it's good context for our listeners and for our coaches or business leaders, is that layer of culture. Like different cultures look at accountability differently. I'm going to say this, I was confronted with this in the European reality and workforce around what I saw to be accountability and what my participants needed. So as a coach, even, whether it be in the group coaching conversation or team coaching conversation, I know we're going to get to self in a moment, but we can't ignore or dismiss. There's a generational thing, but there's also a cultural layer. And regardless of where you are in the world, even I work with a lot of international people who English is not their first language. So they call it lingua franca. And so they're coming together speaking English, but their native languages is not English. And so in that context, what does accountability look like? How do those social norms look like? What it means for one, how do you get that alignment of peers?
Yeah.
Right.
I think that's such a key issue. And again, like for our whole business, right? We don't just coach in our backyard here in Toronto, which is one of the most multicultural cities of the world, which again, lingua franca, it plays out every day in a Toronto-based workspace as well. I think this is a really important layer. I think it also spotlights future conversations here at the Coaching Many, working with not only multi-generational groups and teams, but multinational, multicultural, global, right? This is our sweet spot. This is what we've been doing as a business for the last 20 years. And it's so critical. I think a lot of people are really now entering this foray of going, I need to learn more about the world. It's going to probably be present if you really step back and notice what is the culture of the group or the team. That is going to help us really facilitate this dialogue, right? Dialogue meaning two-way conversation around what does accountability mean? How do you hold accountability? How do you hold responsibility? Is it organizational responsibility? Is it self-responsibility? I think there's a big range.
But there is a big range.
And even in a peer group, when we're coming together with our peers, what accountability means is different for me than someone else. So even taking time as a coach to have people identify, what does accountability mean for you? What does it mean to be at choice? What does it mean to take responsibility? Is that of self, of what, So lots of layers here, but let's talk a little bit about peers, because I think the peer relationship is at the heart of both group and team coaching. In a group, again, we're bringing people together from different geographies, different industries, maybe different organizations, different backgrounds, but they have that common interest. So what do you notice about the range? Let's talk about the range of like peer accountability and what that can look like. Because I always think accountability, then I think this coaching word of structure being, how do I want to be reminded of what I'm saying I'm going to be doing or thinking about or accountable for? So what do you think about peer structure?
I think peer support, peer structure is fundamental in this conversation of coaching many groups, teams. And it's also, I think, the word that's coming to me is this is where the essence and the power of coaching many is. Like the spotlight is not meant to be on us as the coach.
Yeah.
And we have to remember that and allow ourselves to not have it be on us in service of what we stand for the group. And so part of that is looking at the dynamic of the group, looking at what are the group needs, but supporting the peers, supporting everyone to bring their voice. And this is in the context of group and team coaching as well as peer, because there's an effective or strong peer accountability or support is a prerequisite of that is really to have the participants have their voice, bring their voice. So part of what is in this conversation is really that trust, safety, and connection. How are we creating the container to allow this peer support? And for those who are like, trust, safety, and connection, what does that mean? Go back to episode 3, because we spent a full episode on this. But it is that, I kind of see that to be the prerequisite in order to support that peer accountability and to really support that I'm even thinking about Tuckman's forming, storming, norming, right? Performing, that performing phase is where that you recognize that peer support is there. And I won't speak to teams. I'll let you, but from a group standpoint, at least from what I experienced and from what I know, is that is where, with good matching, with good identification, that's where the transformation happens. It can happen as much in the greater conversation as well as in the smaller peer support, peer accountability in the conversations, let alone beyond the conversation, beyond the coaching conversation.
Yes.
So what are your thoughts?
And I think again, like peers are the heart of everything, even in a team-based environment, right? Especially in a team-based environment. So how do we not only recognize our individual needs, but then our collective focus? So why do teams exist? Teams exist to create results. Teams exist to help the business thrive and grow, whether that's profitability or service-based, depending on for-profit, not-for-profit. And I think one of the things with accountability is, and this very much goes to culture, is, what is the organizational culture around personal responsibility? Is it I'm going to take ownership and I'm going to follow through? Or is it like, no way, I'll say I'll do it, but I never follow through and I never get called on it as well? And that can be very different in coaching in those different contexts. So we bring a bias, we bring our perspective. How do we meet the team where they're at? And I think accountability is often at the heart of conflict, because maybe there is a team dynamic that's evolved where people are not being called out when they're not following through on what they say they are going to do, because maybe they're not seeing it modeled in upper layers. That's often like what's at the heart of it. Yet this really can be a huge source of conflict. So as a coach, how are we also sometimes introducing new practices, new processes? This brings us to a little bit around the tools, but I can't talk about accountability, and I'm surprised it hasn't come up yet. But, the tool of the one-page plan. So many of you will have a copy of Reconnecting Workspaces, Plan, Do, Track, Coaching Business Builder. Turn to the back. Even Effective Virtual Conversations, the last page of those books has a copy of the one-page plan, which is simply a 5x5 table, getting people to articulate what are their top 3 to 5 goals. What's the description around that goal? What are their measures? What will it look like when they're successful? And what's going to help or hinder that goal achievement? It might sound very basic, but when teams get clarity on what they are saying they're accountable for, they have crystal vision on what this success is going to look like, whether I'm here in the office with you every day or we're only seeing each other 2 times a week. That is where teams can really, even in their most diverse forms, find traction together. And who doesn't want a quick win in today's world of complexity? So I think accountability, especially as we get back into fall, into the beginning of the year, into those ends of quarters and beginning of new quarters, working with the teams that you're supporting around accountability, whether it's team accountability or even just, how are you making strides towards what you're accountable for as a team, as a department this year, helping them connect it with their styles, their work preferences, their motivation, and what gives them joy. It's, I think, an integral part of what we do as a team coach. It takes people back to the basics. And truly, in a world of complexity, that is what we want to help teams do. People are so overwhelmed in the workspace today. We got to go back to the basics. And to me, goals and accountability are at the heart of keeping things simple.
Yeah. And if I may add from a group context, I think for us as coaches, it's fundamental that we know what our participants' goals are, right? So that way we can support them in realizing them. Otherwise, it's action without awareness. It's awareness without action. There's really there's no learning. There's no path. There's no trajectory. Having said that, it's also key. The other point that I want to say about this is part of this conversation is we have to be able to support the participant to actually have clarity. Like a lot of people come into our programs in group context saying, yeah, I want to actually live a life that my best life, but they don't even know what that is, what that means. And so goals helps them have some clarity, and that way they can navigate that. So we need it for ourselves as coaches to support that conversation, but oftentimes our participants need it for themselves. So that way they actually know what they're working towards. And so that way we can then in turn support them. And from a group context, and this is where I get juiced about groups. And I was saying this to you before I got on the call, like thinking about this topic today, I actually realized why I love groups. And the reason why I love groups is the power of the group dynamic, the power of the fact that people in group coaching come with a common theme, but they're on an individual path. And yet they get inspiration from one another. They get support from one another. They get motivation. They get empathy. They get compassion. They get refilled. They get refueled to be able to then keep going, especially in a time of change or transition, whatever it is. Even when I'm thinking about the group coaching I did in Italy not too long ago. They leaned on one another. They kept each other accountable because they realized that the individual peer was doing their thing on their goal. And yet that was motivating to them. So this again is allowing the group to lean in and inspire and act from that, if that makes sense.
Well, it makes a lot of sense. And from a research perspective, we've known this for decades, right? That what do the best leaders do? They get out of the way. They allow the peers in a team to interrelate, to keep each other in line, right? We have known for decades that really the power of the peer process is so much greater than any leader can wield. And so what's at the heart of our work here and what's at the heart of this whole podcast is how do we build community? How do we build community, which can be used for good or bad, but really it's the same principles. How do we affect change? How do we affect social change? It's through harnessing the collaborative, the collective. So you raise an interesting segue. And again, we could keep going. We can keep going for a few more minutes on this, but you bring us to goals. And I think, goals are at the heart of most, not every coaching process, but certainly, as you've said, and we've been reinforcing throughout this entire podcast, a key part of helping people thrive in a group context is having clarity on their roadmap. Where are they going? And how is my road a little bit different than you're traveling? We want to avoid comparison. We want to avoid the negatives or the downside of social processes, which can include comparison. It can include social loafing, right? And social loafing, you might be like, what's that term? Social loafing means that in a group-based context, we are less likely to take individual action. We become loafers. We're like on the couch. Oh, someone else will do it. I don't have to do it. So again, that might be another interesting area to explore with a group or a team. Who is taking action? Are the same people always the ones that are stepping up to the plate? And if so, what does that mean for collaborative efforts? What does it mean for role fatigue? What does it mean on a lot of levels? So again, this is you've been sort of calling it, as you've been speaking today, Evana, I'm thinking it's like, this is an integral part of understanding the power of what we do. And it's so integral that I think if you have not done any further learning around things like group process, group dynamics, it's absolutely essential that you do. These are some of the topics we get into in coaching diverse teams and groups. Because if you don't understand motivational theory, if you don't understand work styles, how do you coach to that? The context of coaching many is so colorful. And what I have in front of me, of course, is the 90-Day Guide for Success, right? This is a book that came out 3 years ago, 90 different topics that people in today's workspace need to understand. Interestingly, day 8 out of the 90 days is goals. Well, you might think, but isn't that like, shouldn't that be number one? Well, what about people's vision and building trust, building relationships? I can't talk about my goals if I don't know you, if I don't understand who you are. So really, think about today's conversation around accountability is it's not necessarily the first thing you need to do, right? You need to have that trust, safety, and connection that you've talked to, Evana, that we always talk to, because that is an integral piece of this process.
It's fundamental. We can't fulfill our vision of what we stand for as coaches without some fundamental elements in that, which is part to me is creating that container for people to feel like they can speak up, that they can open up. And that does take time, right? Trust is built incrementally and over time. However, as we teach in our various programs, including Group Coaching Essentials, there is strong processes or structures that you can integrate in your conversations to support that, to kind of, I'm going to say, not accelerate it, because it's not something that can be accelerated, but there are definitely tools and structures that support that foundation to be able to then get some momentum, both at a peer level, at a group level, at a broader level. But they're fundamental. So I'm glad you said that. I'm glad that you pulled out that 90 days, because a lot of people, even I was like, day 8, Jen, really? But you're right. Like, where's the vision? Yeah. And I think you touched on beautifully is even the role of like the relationships. Like part of that is creating that trust, safety, connection. We talk about it in different ways, and we've talked about it in episode 4. So go back and listen to results versus relationships and that dance and dynamic. But even from a group or team conversation, how are we helping people to connect? How are we helping people see where we're similar, but also where the differences are, and how the differences can be as beautiful and magnificent as the similarities, those connecting points?
I'll just say, why is there, increase in conflict? Why are people opting out in a workspace? Because they're being forced or being told, you need to do this. Well, if we need to be accountable, let's think about how I could be invited versus
Yeah.
pushed to do something. And that talks to motivation. It talks to the distinctions, right? So even as a coach, back to like the practicality of this, how are you listening for how people want to be held accountable? For
Yeah.
some of us, me, I'm very visual. I thrive when I have a visual reminder. I'm looking out of my camera because what's beside me? It's okay, what's the vision for this quarter for the business?
Yeah.
Is this aligned? Am I just saying, oh, I'll do that when it's not really aligned with where I'm going or where we are going as a team or an organization? That's not being responsible. Back to responsibility. What are you
Mhm.
responsible for as an individual, as a team, as a business? That's going to come part and parcel with this conversation around accountability as well.
And
So,
and that is fundamental, if I may say, that is really fundamental, speaking at it and those layers, the individual,
yes.
the team, the
Mhm.
organization, and how do I, as an individual of this team, where does my responsibility reside versus at a team level, at an organizational level? And I think this is really key because the whole conflict piece, my own personal assertion, I have no research behind this, but I think a lot of what avoids accountability is that fear of conflict.
Yes.
Even in a family dynamic, oh, who am I to say my needs, create a boundary,
Yeah.
or
Boundaries.
say
Back to
no to,
boundaries.
or say no. You want me to do this? No, I don't have the bandwidth,
Yeah. Or
right?
counterpoint, if you'd like me to do this, what would you suggest about that?
Yeah,
I think,
yeah.
and that's a way that I think in a very choice-based
Yes.
dialogue, we can avoid conflict because a lot of people are like, oh, my boss told me to do this, but I need to do that. Well, let's
Yeah.
have a conversation. So, boss, if you need me to do this, what about this other project? Which one are you going to prioritize?
Mhm.
Right? I
Mhm.
think we need to really invest in organizations right now in the skills in helping people have dialogue around
Yeah.
choice, around responsibility, around accountability. Because I think personally, with what I see and the work that I do with organizations, we have not had
Mhm.
very good modeling,
Yeah.
especially over the last
No,
5 years, of how do
I
we
agree.
take personal responsibility in a world that is often out of our control, and how do we prioritize together to say A or B, and we need to do that together rather than in a
Mhm.
conflict way of, oh, they told me I had to do this. Well, as employees, we can say to our bosses, I had to do it early in my career. I have, 30 hours this week, and what would you like me to prioritize?
Mhm.
That's just saying.
What is coming to me, Jen, is you said this earlier. It's the work culture. It's the culture of the organization. I'm also hearing when you were saying inviting. I think I do a lot of work with this in terms of just that working with different people who English isn't their first language, but that languaging, that softer language, inviting versus telling. Like how can we actually, because that is part of the language, that is part of that creating that space, that container for people to be able to say, my plate is full. I want to do this, but what's the priority? And I'm going to say this going back to my own corporate days, because I worked in corporate for 10 years. There was in the same organization, there was leaders who had developed their skill that I could approach them with that. And then there were other leaders that were still in the development path that needed that development. And it was a very different experience as a leader. And so there is that, like, where do we, and I think for our business leaders in the conversation and our listening base, but also with our coaches who are in organizations, whether you're doing groups or teams, I think there's a role that we have to kind of listen to and invite this conversation. Like you said, what does accountability look like to you as the leader of this team?
Mhm.
What does it look like for the members as a team and then
As an
individually
entity. Yeah.
as an
Yeah.
entity? Thank you.
And so I think again we've probably hit on another episode that will touch base in
Yeah.
the future because these are truly the conversations that make change happen in organizations. And with you can see my Gallup box behind me as Gallup certified coach. I get their feed of like latest data all the time. A few months ago, I talked about the 42% stat of Canadian employees are burnt out. Why? And I feel a big part of it is because we don't feel like we are actually part of the workspace anymore. We're being told what to do. So to development, right? If we now have, and again, we're seeing some very interesting trends in leadership. We often have younger leaders or people who are still grappling to keep their role, and they may
Yeah.
not be modeling the types of behaviors and languaging that is actually motivational and empowering. We cannot live and operate in a command and control. The data is very clear of what organizations are thriving right now and what organizations that have tried to claw things back are floundering and even disappearing because people want choice. People want to be involved. And I think, again, as someone who's been very involved in social justice work for many decades, I think there's a point at which, the balance tips. So coaching to me is a big part of this, right? It's why I became a coach. How do we really affect change over time with the people's voice? And that is what is at the heart of this work of coaching many. So let's talk a little bit as we come into this last sort of 5 minutes of the episode. We talked about the peer, the difference between team and group, self-accountability, right? I want to just shine the light on how are we cultivating that in groups, in one-on-one conversations and teams. And it may be, through a note, post-it note, something on my screensaver, but this is also where technology comes in. So I do want to give a little shout out because it just launched the 90-day guide, which of course has been a big book, which, 485 pages.
Wow.
It then became drizzled down into the 90-day elements table. And just about 10 days ago, the app launched on Deckable, which some of you have heard me talk about my love affair with this great app, because really it's about accountability. It's about having daily steps and practice together. So you can go to your app store, download Deckable, and for 3 days, you can try out the 90-day guide for success, which is really built in the notion of every day there's a different focus. You take 10 minutes of reflective action, but reflective space to reflect and then take action on these different 90 days. So I'm going to just do a quick draw because I think it's fun. Should we do 1, 2, or 3, Evana? What do you think? What's a good number?
I say 1. Let's have a flavor.
We're going to just do a flavor. So I've done a quick draw, and the app is actually going to pull just a random card. I'm going to touch the card. Let's see what day the app has taken us to. It's taking us to a weekly review. So it's not just enough, right? Accountability is not just the daily steps. We need to create pause as a team, as a group, to look at what are we doing. So interestingly, no surprise, what got picked by the universe? Week 4 review, learning by doing. So how are you creating reflective space? I'm not going to go through all questions that are on a weekly review, but I'll pick 2. And even are you building space in your accountability practice to think about the key learning this week? What worked? What didn't work? What flowed? What got in the way? I would challenge our listeners to, especially as you're getting back to fall, to think about that 10-minute practice every week of reflection. What happened this week? What were the successes? What were the things that didn't work? Some of you might frame it as failure. I would say it's part of the experiment of life. It just didn't work the way we thought it would. And that's okay, at least in business. Also, what was your theme this week, right? What's your theme for the week? And over time, especially with accountability, right? We don't always see how far we go because change doesn't happen in these great leaps and bounds. It happens in these incremental moments. Yet at the end of the week, we might see that we're in a different place than we were last week. Also, with these wrap-up themes, our themes may change. And looking back over the space of a month, a quarter, 12 weeks, or even 52 weeks, we can see our progress through the rearview mirror, which is really interesting. So I offer those 2 just as part of the app. Again, you can play with this, go to Deckable. You can go and do your full day 1 through 30, or like I did, you can pick a random day. And there's a little video where you'll see me talk more and take you through the actual weekly review. So invite for you to do that. And whether you choose to do it with me on the app or in the book, right? Like pick up the book. Chances are many of you as listeners have the book on your bookcase. Pull it off the bookcase. It was created for you to actually take notes. I have a written copy because I don't like to write in big books, but you know what? I have the digital copy. So you can actually go in and just write your reflections there. because understanding your wrap up theme, what you're looking forward to, what to-dos have surfaced, that's going to save you a heck of a lot of time in the week itself.
Yeah. I love it, Jen. And I think it's really important if I can highlight this whole idea of the 90-day deckable deck and the idea of reflection. Reflection is actually a tool that you can use, that we need to be using as a way to go, hold on, pause. Let's look at this week 4, which I didn't realize it would actually, you could do them in non-sequential order. So that's a big win for me to go, whoa, I can
pick a card to have insight, right? Like that was the insight. Learn by doing. Of course.
But what I love about it though is through the process of reflection, it actually allows you to take that pause, assess the situation, and make necessary adjustments towards your goal, towards your vision. And that is an accountability tool. So
plan,
as a coach,
right?
Plan, do, track. Yeah. So good stuff. Thanks. I love that.
So for those of you who have enjoyed today's episode, if you're interested in learning more about the peer and the group, those are group and team coaching essentials or ICF CCE approved programming. We've talked about Deckable, which again, it's its own app. It is an app-based program that you can take advantage of. You can actually now benefit from the 90-day guide. But if you're a coach, you might want to also explore the Activate deck, which speaks to your superpowers, because accountability, there is a link between how we show up and also our preferences in terms of accountability. The final piece that I would just point listeners to is the one-page plan. We've talked about that. Many of you have heard me speak about it for volumes. If you've been with Evana in Group Coaching Essential over the last few years, we take you through it. We get you to set your own goals and work through it, because we want to model in our programming what you're going to be doing with your groups. The group needs to own it. And that's why after, I think now 19 years almost of running Group Coaching Essentials almost every month of the year, we have seen cohort after cohort really get activated and energized when peers lean in to each other. So my invite as you approach any peer-based learning this fall, how are you leaning in? And how are you calling others forward? Because if we're in a group, we can all be leaning in and be creating some real magic, or we can just be showing up. And there's a really different energy than just showing up versus leaning in together. And I want to leave you with that inquiry, especially as we think about accountability. Are you just simply going through the days? Or are you really looking at carpe diem, sucking the marrow out of life, right? That has been my philosophy for many years. Like, I can just get by, or I can choose in all the craziness that my world is right now to really enjoy it to the fullest as well.
Yeah, I love it. I want to add to that because it's a beautiful point. Because what I'm hearing and what you're saying is the whole modeling piece and that activating piece. And for me in the work that I do, Jen, I really get clear because a lot of the women that come through my programs that I work with come with a position that they don't know what they want. They don't even know how to articulate that to be able to be accountable, to take that ownership, to be empowered. So part of what I really create in the space, in the container, both in the group, but also individually, is the space where they can assert themselves. If we come from a place that people are naturally creative, resourceful, and whole, and as the coach, we're creating the container where they can speak up. That way, our coaching conversation becomes a playground to practice, a playground to play, a playground to make progress. And in making progress, then you can actually take it beyond the safe space we've created with other participants and back into life and back into your world. And I think that's the power of accountability and the power of a coach, or in the coach, whether it be around your kitchen table with a team in your boardroom, is what is the space we're holding to allow people the space where they can speak their needs and wants. So that way they get empowered. They get to, see, oh, wow, this is how it's being received. This is what it looks like to assert myself so I can do it beyond the realm of the small agenda and into the bigger agenda of life.
Love it. And just as you've really nicely modeled here, our clients are different creatures, right? Some people are early in the journey, learning to build new skills. Others have been doing this forever. And just
Absolutely.
want to like lean in and just, continue running and savoring the highs and lows of life. And so really, who are your clients and where are they going to benefit from? We hope that you've enjoyed today's episode. We've spotlighted many other episodes to go check out. And we'd love for you to share this within your network. So let other coaches know, let leaders know. I think today's episode is really important for teams to listen to, for groups to listen to, for peers to listen to, because we call each other out. And how do we want to create the world together, right? Accountability is key with all the challenges that are emerging in the world today. Someone's got to take action. Is it going to be you? That's what I'll leave you with. So, Evana, until we meet next time in a few weeks, be well. Anything you want to foreshadow for where we're going next?
No, I'm good. I say we bring some element of surprise because I don't remember what's next, quite honestly. So I can't spotlight. I'm in the moment. Sorry, I don't have it.
Well, I must say, I've enjoyed our episodes. Hope all of our listeners do. We've got more in the pipeline. And so we look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks. coachingmanypodcast.com, and we'll see you soon. Take care.
Ciao.